For me, one of the most interesting moments this year was the national conversation that we had around conscription back in January. It all started when the outgoing head of the army said that the UK should be looking at some form of citizen army as geopolitical threats from countries like Russia grows. This triggered a national dialogue, and I think it's fair to say a bit of panic about the idea that young people would get a letter through their door announcing that they were off to fight against Russia. That wasn't what Sir Patrick Sanders actually said, or what he clarified he actually meant, but nonetheless it did get people thinking about the readiness of British armed forces and the readiness of its people to step up and fight. It culminated in Rishi Sunak, the then Prime Minister, announcing that if his party, the Conservatives, were re-elected at the general election, they would introduce national service. This was a scheme where all 18-year-olds would have to either do a stint with the military or volunteer one weekend every month. The reason I think this was so interesting and important was partly because it highlighted very serious conversations around the readiness of the UK's armed forces and some concerns that it simply wouldn't be able to suffice, but also I think it made people engage with the concept of geopolitical threats or war with Russia in a totally different way. These things often feel very far away and very abstract. It forced people across the UK to face the reality of what an all-out war could actually mean. Rishi Sunak's decision to make this part of his general election pitch, in fact a really big part of his general election pitch, was seen as many as a kind of bid to win back the right and hark back to the kind of glory days of World War II. But armed forces chiefs were very quick to pour water on this fire and say that actually they have no plans for conscription, so it's not something you need to worry about in 2025. I think one of the most iconic images of 2024 was Rishi in the rain, when Rishi Sunak, then Prime Minister, went outside number 10 Downing Street and called the general election, but nobody had thought to either bring an umbrella or move the whole thing indoors. With British weather as it is, it's quite a miracle really that nobody thought of that. He was stood there getting increasingly sodden as he accepted that he was fighting for his political survival. The odds were stacked against the Conservatives, and of course, as we now know, things didn't get any better. They lost a landslide victory to Labour. Do you remember learning in school about pathetic fallacy, where the weather reflects the mood? It felt like this was the textbook example. The rain was pouring, and so too were the vibes. We joke about it now, but I do think it made a much more serious point about the strategic failures involved in that campaign. And I think Rishi never quite managed to shake that image of himself absolutely drenched, sopping wet, and it sort of came to define really the tone of the general election for him. Another really important and far more serious moment from 2024 for me was the Southport riots. So 3 girls were tragically killed and many others injured during a mass stabbing at a Taylor Swift themed dance party in Southport. It was a horrendous attack. Immediately after the attack, disinformation started swirling online that the attacker had been an asylum seeker. This wasn't true at all, but this caught fire, this idea, and we saw it erupt into rioting across the UK. Bricks were thrown at mosques, hotels housing asylum seekers were attacked, so were the police. They were absolutely shocking scenes to see erupting really across the UK. I think this showed two things. Firstly, clearly the strength of feeling and polarisation around the issue of migration in the UK, but also the Islamophobia, the racism which has seeped into elements of that. And I think it also showed how quickly disinformation spread, how susceptible we clearly are in the UK to that. The social media account which posted that an asylum seeker had been responsible for the Southport stabbings has been linked to Russia. While we don't know exactly where this came from, disinformation has long been a key part of the Russian playbook. I think it raised serious questions around the susceptibility of the population to disinformation and whether organisations, even news organisations, the police, are doing enough to quell that. I think this is something we've got to be really mindful of in 2025, not least because we'll be seeing the return of US President Donald Trump, who spread extensive misinformation around the results of the last presidential election. Disinformation campaigns are becoming more and more sophisticated, and there's no shortage of people who would like to spread it. It's certainly something we're going to have to keep an eye on in 2025.